I'm really advocating that kids are comfortable being themselves, right? That they're comfortable in their own skin, that they know who they are and they will be that.
I think sometimes as parents, our calling in life is to produce really well behaved kids and get them to do the right things at the right time for the right people in the right places. Today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in this daily segment, Facing the Dark, Dr. Kathy is going to help us unpack that a little bit. Is that weight really important for us to bear as parents? Or is there another calling that we should have as we encourage our kids to live into the person that God's made them? So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
Dr. Kathy, Elizabeth Tenty, she wrote recently in the publication Motherly an article that she talks about really four things that parents of well behaved kids always do without realizing it. She references a viral TikTok video from the account BCBA underscore Amanda, who explains that parents of well behaved kids really listen to their kids, validate their child's emotions, explain their decisions, and stick with boundaries that they set for their kids. Now, Dr. Kathy, before we really jump into this topic of the four things that Elizabeth Tenty writes about, I want to ask you, oftentimes we have, as parents, have goals and kind of a success marker in parenting. Is the idea of having well-behaved kids the target that we should be shooting for? Or what should the target that we are shooting for be in parenting?
That's such a good question. Yeah, I imagine there's stress sometimes. Are my kids going to act like my kids today? Are they going to be well behaved? Certainly, being well behaved is necessary for successful, joyful, productive life. And if they don't learn it as kids, it will be harder for them to learn as, teens and adults what well behaved is and what it feels like and how to make it happen. So I'm not opposed to well behaved kids. I'm really advocating that kids are comfortable being themselves, right? That they're comfortable in their own skin, that they know who they are and they will be that. So you have a child on a spectrum, you don't expect the same thing from him. You have a child who's OCD, you give space and time for him to rehearse the patterns that he needs so he can leave the house with comfortable, safe feelings. So to let them be who they are, and maybe we have to explain that to babysitters and to relatives and friends. Hey, my son is, or my son has, yada, yada, yada. And you explain it. So you defend a little bit. I would talk all day about character. And character is necessary to be well behaved. So again, I would love for parents and grandparents and educators to promote good character, healthy character, joy and gratitude, self-control, self-respect, respect for others, patience and kindness and goodness. I mean, I could go on. And it's character qualities that need to show up. That's what I would want for children. And joy and freedom, right? For them to have joy and for them to have freedom and to express that within proper boundaries that we have taught them.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I think that's helpful. It gives us kind of a little bit of a wider benchmark or a wider target to shoot for as parents. It's more than just, do my kids listen to me the first time? I think that by nature, kids don't. I don't think they ever will listen the first time. I say this because I've tried it for eight kids, and that benchmark is just really hard because sometimes, like you kind of alluded to, they have different things that they're going on in their mind. They're in a imaginary world, and so I ask them to do something and it pulls them out of that world. And it might take them a hot minute to do that. Or they're, having processing challenges because they're developing and growing. Their brain is like has all kinds of, it's like a chemistry experiment. And there's all kinds of enzymes that are going on in their brain. So they might not hear me the first time. So just because my 8-year-old doesn't listen to me the first time or might act out in something, that doesn't mean necessarily that we're doing a bad job in parenting. It might mean that they're growing, right? We need to probably have that posture. It feels a little bit like a funny bar to set to have well-behaved kids. But she talks about these four things, this idea of listening to your kids, like really listening to them, validating their emotions, explaining their decisions and kind of your decisions in disciplining them or talking through why they can do something and not do something else. And even like sticking with boundaries that they set for their kids. Why do you think that these 4 things she's identified really drive kids to have maybe a well-behaved, and maybe I wanna change that idea of well-behaved to having an identity. I think that well-behaved kids are an identity kids. They have competence to know how they should act in the situation, and we call it well-behaved, but they just know what they should do in Walmart. Sometimes my kids don't know what they should do in Walmart, but sometimes but I think that also goes into school. Well-behaved kids in school know what they should do in school. Well-behaved kids on the basketball court know what they should do in the basketball court. I think that a lot of it kind of goes back to identity. So would you add anything else to this list that parents need to be conscious of to build identity for their kids with these 4 things? Or are these 4 really good? And yes, those are the target that we should really shoot for as parents. What do you think about that?
Let me answer it this way. I do agree with listening to their kids, really listening not for your turn to talk, listening not to judge. Don't let that be the first thing that you expect to do, but listening to understand and listening to help them understand. So that would be to clarify and to expand and to maybe complete a thought. So, yes, listen with the right reasons. Validate their child's emotion. Like we've talked before on the podcast about how important emotions are. Emotions change behavior. We have way too many people in our culture today who just go with their feelings and they don't think about whether the feelings are valid or even right and appropriate and biblical responses to whatever's going on. So to teach them how to handle an offense, to teach them how to apologize when they recognize that they're wrong and they don't like that feeling of guilt and shame that's come upon them. So not just validate their emotions, but we can teach about emotion in conversation and in, dinner table time. Explain the decisions. This is interesting. So what she's saying is that parents who explain the decisions they're making are going to have more obedient kids. I would agree with that to an extent, that when you explain, hey, we can't go to grandma's today because she's not feeling well, so I need you to be flexible and be willing to change our plans without complaining. That's called flexibility. Grandma isn't feeling well, we can't go. Rather than simply, no, we're not going. And then you walk away and the kid is frustrated and thinking, well, did I do something wrong? So there's a place for explaining. Absolutely in agreement with that. However, I want to caution our listeners to understand that you don't explain so that they can complain. So don't explain your motivation and your reason and then give them the opportunity to say, yes, but mom, what about this? So you explain to really defend what you're doing so that they can learn that there are cause effect relationships that take place. I think that's important. And then absolutely stick with the boundaries. And if you're parenting with a mate or partner, make sure there's agreement there that this is why bedtime, this is why fruit is your snack. This is why we don't game for more than 30 minutes at a time. So keep your boundaries and don't let them manipulate you and push your button and persuade you because you're a lazy parent in that moment and you want them to just go away. Like that's hard, right? So this is why you make sure you take care of yourself so that you can do it well. I do agree that those are 4 good things.
I love that, Dr. Kathy. I'm glad that you explained that a little bit because I think some of us might have a posture or an attitude with some of these things, especially when we explain the decisions, that it just kind of becomes this open dialogue or discussion that we should have ad nauseum to the end, especially with junior high students that are learning how logic works. It is like it's like entering into battle and they have all the weapons and I have nothing. Like it can be really challenging. So I appreciate that. And I want to close with this. A lot of times with parenting, we kind of walk into these places and we realize that our kids, and I have learned to term it this way based on your work and mentorship and the kind of the books that I've read that you've written on this topic. But our kids will act incompetent in some situations. And I've learned that that doesn't mean that they're not well behaved. It means that they're struggling to understand how to act in that place, right? Like the grocery store. What have I not done to encourage my child to have competence to act in the grocery store? Have I, made them feel insecure about going into the grocery store in some way, shape, or form? Have I not given them a sense of belonging or who they are in the grocery store? Hey guys, when we walk into the grocery store, we do this with one of our kids. Dad's going to pick out what's going in the cart, and I really want you to help me when I ask you to help me. I give them an identity. You're my helper here. We're not opposing forces here that are trying to get gushers in the cart. That doesn't happen, right? We have an attitude there, right? I mean, I'm helping them be competent in those situations. But sometimes our kids are incompetent. We don't even recognize it. We go to a family wedding and we're like, why are you acting like this? My kids don't act like that. And then I would say, well, actually, your kids do act like that because they don't know what they should do in that place. How do we help guide kids to be maybe more confident in their identity, knowing that a lot of times they might just be acting out of anxiety when we say that they're misbehaved or they're not well behaved kids? They just don't know what they should do, right? How do we help them be better in those places?
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, anxiety for sure. And I mean, one of the things I'll say is, let's say when they are misbehaving or they're behaving in a way that surprises you, ask yourself why. Like, don't go right to the place of, man, you're a bad kid today. No, it's insecurity because of inexperience. They're overwhelmed by all the people, all the choices, all the noise, all the bright lights. Daddy's walking so fast, he forgot that my legs are little. I mean, whatever the situation might be, and they might not feel freedom to say, hey, dad, slow down, because they don't want to judge you. I've had so many children tell me that they don't want to correct their parents for fear that their parents will think that they're bad. No, my daddy's really good, but there's this thing he does that makes it really hard for me to be his little boy. And he needs to have the freedom to tell you that. So, I think that we ask ourselves, why are they acting the way they're acting? And I love what you do with your kids, Wayne. Seriously, you're my helper today. Like, you're not the decision maker. Like, I'm the decision maker, you know. But you get to help. Like, you get to help. You don't have to help. You get to help. It's like I'm so glad you're the one that I chose to come with me because I know that you're going to do this well. We give them an identity with the words that we speak over them. We speak life over people or death over people. And we can make the choice to go to that place of life. I think we talk about character. We talk about growth. We look for growth. I think it's so important. And we need to look at it from their perspective, right? Like, we've been to the grocery store 1,000 times, or we've been to a mall, or we've been to a movie theater. We understand about quiet, or we, fill in the blank. And we need to remember, okay, wait, my 8-year-old has had limited experiences with funerals or with weddings or with, fancy museums where you don't touch, limited experience means that I explain so that they feel safe here. I don't explain so that they're behaved well here, although that's a goal you have. You explain so that they feel safe here. Because you and I know, Wayne, that safety and security causes us to act well because that stress and that anxiety goes away.
I don't know about you, but I really felt encouraged by what Dr. Kathy had to say today. It gave me some vision of a little bit where to live into. It reminds me of a passage that comes out of Judges chapter 6, and I'll read verse 12. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor." Now, this story comes out of Gideon's life, and Gideon was living in fear while the Midianites oppressed Israel. He was really considering himself as the least in his family, and he was of the smallest tribe of the nation of Israel. Yet God addressed him not by his circumstances or his fears, but by the future that he had in store for him, calling him a mighty man of valor. This word from God transforms Gideon's self-perception. Empowered by that identity, Gideon eventually leads Israel to victory over their enemies. But all of the while, Gideon questions and doubts and really wrestles with his calling and his identity. Yet time and again, God calls Gideon somebody who is mighty and strong and a man of conviction. When you read Gideon's story, it almost seems like he's anything but that. But God calls Gideon and equips Gideon, and he really does live into that. I think it's important for us as parents to speak into our children, their God-given potential, rather than what their present limitations or fears are, or even what they're communicating back to us. Remind them of who they are in Christ, really as mighty people, chosen, beloved, favored people. Even when they feel weak or unqualified, it's important that we continue to give God's vision of them to them, the same way that Gideon received from the angel of the Lord and from the Lord's calling in his life. Your encouraging words can anchor your kids in a truer identity than any current struggle that they face right now. I hope that's an encouragement for you, and I hope this whole podcast is an encouragement for you. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. We're so glad that you're listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast, this daily segment, Facing the Dark. And we're looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.